And now let's take a look at the history of the CD-ROM. In 1966, American inventor James T. Russell filed for a patent that was the building block of the compact disc, or CD, technology. He was awarded the patent in 1970, but it wasn't until a decade later that we see the first CDs. Philips and Sony, two giants in consumer electronics at the time, had independently been working on prototypes for a CD, and in 1979 licensed Russell's technology and created the Red Book CD-DA standard. From that point on, CDs would evolve into the new high-end format for music, with consumer products in 1983. But it wouldn't take long until the popular format was also used for other purposes. The CD-ROM was introduced in 1985 and was used to access data instead of audio at an exponential amount of size compared to the other computer-based data standards of the time, such as floppy disk and cassette tape. It wasn't long before software and video games began to distribute on the format. CD-ROMs were available for computers for quite some time before they finally took off as the majority format for games. It wasn't until 1993 and two specific games that the format truly had killer apps, or titles that you purchased new hardware for. Those titles were Seventh Guest and Myst. Prior to 1993, it was possible to purchase games on CD-ROMs, many of them from the adventure genre and containing additional music or fully voiced gameplay, where you normally had text. But both Seventh Guest and Myst required a CD-ROM drive to play. Seventh Guest told the tale of an amnesia-ridden protagonist navigating a haunted mansion and solving puzzles to discover the truth behind a series of deaths. Myst, on the other hand, had an unnamed player navigating a mysterious world with different interior and exterior areas, solving puzzles in an attempt to assist two brothers, each trapped in colored books, one red, one blue, by their father. Both were more parlor tricks than actual games, with Seventh Guest utilizing full video to convey its messages, whereas Myst was merely a hypercard stack, which you can think of as a basic website with images in high detail. None of this mattered because those that saw these games in action wanted them, and the CD-ROM market skyrocketed as a result. Now, before the release of these pivotal PC games, CD-ROMs on consoles were already in existence and had been for nearly 5 years, albeit in the form of expensive add-ons for current consoles or even more expensive standalone home consoles. Japan was the first, as is the case with most video games in history, to receive a CD-ROM console thanks to the company NEC and its CD add-on to the PC Engine, known as the Turbografx 16 in the West, on December 4th, 1988. Now, it's important to note that at this time in Japan, there was a bit of a hardware war, as Sega had just introduced the Mega Drive, or otherwise known as the Genesis in the US, in Japan, and aside from being a true 16-bit system, it had slightly higher hardware capabilities over the then console hardware champion, the PC Engine. I would like to take a sidestep for a moment and talk about the state of game consoles at the time of the PC Engine CD's release. From a worldwide perspective, the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES, was reigning supreme in America with a firm grip on the video game market. In Europe, microcomputers like the ZX Spectrum or Commodore 64 were a large part of gaming, but depending on your country, either the Sega Master System or the NES were garnering attention as a substitute. Japan by far had the most options, with 4 available home consoles to choose from and a wide range of microcomputers as well. Since we are focusing on consoles, I'm going to take a quick comparison of each console for you. The two aging consoles were the NES and the Sega Master System, known as the Mark III in Japan, which were both 8-bit machines. From a technological standpoint, the Master System overpowered the NES in almost every spec. The Master System featured a 3.58 MHz Z80 processor, whereas the NES had a 1.79 MHz 6502 processor. But it's important to note that the 6502 could process data in fewer cycles, so in truth they are somewhat similar in clock speed and capabilities. On the other hand, the NES only had 2 KB of RAM and 2 KB of video RAM, or VRAM, while the Master System boasted 8 KB of RAM and 16 KB of VRAM. In addition, the NES was only capable of 16 colors on the screen at once, with a total palette of 52 colors to choose from, versus the Master System's 32 colors at once and 64 color palette. Sprites could also be twice as large on screen for the Master System as opposed to the NES. Granted, the NES is capable of a 5th sound channel, while the Master System is only limited to 4. But from a hardware perspective, the Master System dominates. Oddly enough, the Master System was a failure in both the US and Japan, and while there are many theories as to why, my personal belief is that the NES just had a much stronger software library. We will see time and time again in the history of video games that your software library can more than make up for weaker hardware. Now, these two consoles had been battling out for nearly 2 years when NEC decides to enter the market on October 30th, 1987, with the PC Engine, otherwise known as the Turbografx 16 in America. Now, the PC Engine was an interesting half-breed between the 8-bit and 16-bit generations. NEC was the manufacturer, but Hudson was responsible for most of the components, including a custom HUC 6280 8-bit processor that could vary clock speeds from 5.37 MHz, 7.16 MHz, and 10.74 MHz, combined with an HUC 6270A 16-bit video processor. Much like the Master System, the PC Engine had 8 KB of RAM, but touts a whopping 64 KB of VRAM. Now, with this extra VRAM, the PC Engine is capable of 482 colors on screen at once, with a total 512 colors to choose from, and large sprites that could be 32 by 64, twice the size of the largest sprite on the Master System, and 4 times the size on NES. PC Engine also had a custom HUC 6280A sound processor that was capable of up to 6 audio channels, the biggest at this point so far. PC Engine was also notable for having its semi-unique cart format, the Hue card, which looked like a credit card, but for many Sega fans, they will point out that they are not unlike the card games used by the Master System. With the additional hardware, the PC Engine stood as the top-end game console for about a year, and then Sega struck back with its first true 16-bit console, the Mega Drive. In America, the Mega Drive was known as the Genesis, and when it premiered on October 29, 1988, almost 1 year to the day after the PC Engine, Sega's Mega Drive had a powerful 16-bit Motorola 68000 chip, often used in microcomputers, and clocked at 7.16 MHz, in addition to a Z80 sub-processor mostly used for sound, but since it matched the Master System processor, also allowed for backward compatibility. A massive upgrade in RAM, the Mega Drive had 72 KB of RAM and 64 KB of VRAM, capable of 64 colors at once from a palette of 512 colors, which from a color standpoint was a slight downgrade from the PC Engine. The console's Yamaha YM2612 featured 6 channels and FM synth as well. Interestingly enough, the Mega Drive did not take off as the premier console over the popularity of the PC Engine, which is counter to the console's experience in US and Europe, but NEC wasn't taking any chances, and it released its CD-ROM add-on that same year. As previously stated, the PC Engine CD premiered on December 4th, 1988, a mere handful of months after the Sega Mega Drive. Initially, the PC Engine CD had little upgrades to the actual console, with 64 KB of DRAM, allowing only for transfer of data from the disk, but doesn't actually add any additional hardware capabilities. A system BIOS card was included for booting up games known as version 1.00. NEC later released the System Card 2.00 and 2.10 as mere BIOS updates until finally upgrading to the Super CD format that required additional RAM to function. If you are in the market for an add-on PC Engine CD or Turbografx CD console, the system card you purchase along with it will be important. Now, this third card, known as the Super System Card or System Card 3.00, not only updated the BIOS, but also added 1.5 megabit of additional RAM that could be used for games and was necessary for these Super CD games. At this time, NEC also releases the Duo line of systems that had the PC Engine or Turbografx 16 integrated with the CD console, extra RAM, and the BIOS built in. So basically, if you own a Duo console, you are ready to go for Super CD and anything before it. Finally, NEC would release the Arcade System Card, which jumped up to a whopping 17.5 megabit of RAM and had either a Pro form for regular add-on consoles, or a Duo form for these integrated Duo systems. These titles are known as arcade CD titles and require the specific card for that system they are played on to function. So if you want to play an arcade CD game on an add-on console, you need to have the Arcade Pro system card. If you want to play an arcade CD game on a Duo console, you have to have the Arcade Duo system card. It should be noted that, of course, these system cards are quite rare and will run you some money. When we feature games on ChronCD from the PC Engine / Turbografx 16, we will refer to these games as either CD, which means they simply require a system BIOS card and are compatible with basically any system. Super CD, which of course requires your system to either be a Duo console or have a Super Systems 3.0 card. Or Arcade CD, which regardless of the console you have, requires the appropriate arcade system card to be in the cart slot. But enough about hardware. You did come here after all to see the games in action. So let's start off ChronCD with the series of launch games that premiered on December 4th, 1988, alongside the PC Engine CD itself.